Hey guys, welcome back to the channel for another video. Today I want to talk about Dominus Impulse. This is one of the most powerful cards of the format, notably because it is very good into the best two decks of the format, which are the Malice deck and the Mitsurugi deck. I want to talk about this card because not every deck can play it. I want to go over the top 10 decks that can play Dominus Impulse. Of course, you can play it in any deck, but obviously you're going to want to stick to the attributes that are allowed by the card. So we're going to go over the top 10 decks, and of course we're going to start at the top with number 1, which is going to be Malice. The best deck of the format, arguably. Maybe it's Mitsurugi, but the best deck of the format can play the best tech card of the format as well. Malice is entirely dark monsters in the main deck, almost entirely dark monsters in the extra deck. The only thing you're going to be locked out of is using Firewall Dragon, which is a light monster. So you're only really summoning Firewall Dragon if you're going first anyway, and if you're going first, you're probably not activating Dominus Impulse from your hand, and you can just set it and set up your Firewall and then not care about the rest of the duel. But if you are going second, you're going to use that Impulse on your opponent, that's fine, and you're probably not going to be using Firewall Dragon to break any boards, so it's really not that bad of a trade-off in that respect. And everything else in the extra deck I think is going to be light, except for maybe like Link Spider. But even though that's Earth, you can summon it. You're not using the Link Spider effect. You can still summon the monsters. Moving on to deck number 2 that can play Dominus Impulse. That's going to be the Mitsurugi deck. And specifically, we're talking about the pure Mitsurugi variant. Ryzeal Mitsurugi cannot play Impulse effectively because it does play light monsters in the main deck that you have to be summoning, like X Ryzeal and Ice Ryzeal. Those do not work well with the Impulse attribute lock. But if you're playing the pure Mitsurugi build, which is pretty popular right now, and one of the main reasons it is popular is because it can play Dominus Impulse. Like, Impulse is that good to sacrifice the Ryzeal engine so that you can actually support playing this non-engine card. All of Mitsurugi's main deck is dark. All of the extra deck that you care about summoning in the pure build is going to be dark as well. It's basically just King of the Feral Imps, IP Masquerena, SP Little Knight, and that's about it that you're going to be summoning from the extra with this deck. Okay, so that wraps up the top 2 decks, the clear top 2 decks of the meta. Now let's move on to the lower tiers, the little bit more rogue choices. And I wouldn't exactly call this next deck rogue, but it is a tier below Malice and Mitsurugi along with everyone else, and that's going to be the Mermal Atlantean deck. So this deck is entirely water from the main deck through the extra deck, and that's because a lot of your cards lock you into summoning waters only anyway, and it does not conflict at all with Dominus Impulse, right? So Impulse allows you to use waters for the rest of the duel, and that's totally fine for the Mermal deck, and there you go. This is one of the reasons that Mermal has actually been able to compete lately, is I believe that its lack of non-engine is compensated for by the quality of non-engine that it can support. And it can support the Charmies, it can support Impulse, and then like Nibiru or Ash or whatever else. And you really do have a quality selection. You'll notice that a lot of the rogue decks that can't play like a ton of non-engine kind of suffer if they can't play cards as high quality as Impulse, and that's why like a lot of the tier 2 decks are going to be Impulse attribute decks. Moving on to deck number 4 that I think is the 4th best deck that can play Dominus Impulse, and that is going to be Labyrinth. So Labyrinth, entirely dark monsters in the main deck and basically the extra deck too. Notably, the only real extra deck cards you're going to be summoning with the Labyrinth deck are going to be Chaos Angel and maybe Typhon. And then if you have some other kind of extra deck variant, like maybe the Unchained cards, well, Unchained is still all dark, so you're good to go on that as well. No conflict with Dominus Impulse to be seen here, and not to mention it's one of the best decks to utilize Dominus Impulse because it is a normal trap card. You're always going to have trap cards in your graveyard, so you're going to get the full value of Impulse to destroy the card as well, and that's going to be really solid. Okay, moving on to the deck number 5 that can support Dominus Impulse, and that's going to be Fire King. Pure Fire King here, or some other version of Fire King, maybe like Fire King Azumina, which is Fire and Dark. Those are both good attributes for Impulse, and we have seen success with the Fire King deck with Impulse in the main or side deck by Dinkabui in the last few months. So he won the French Open with Impulse, I believe, in the main in the Fire King deck, and then the YCS before that. I think Impulse might have been in the side for that particular event. So yeah, Fire King can play Impulse. It's just all fires in the main. It's all fires that you care about. In the extra, notably, we have Hida, we have Promethean Princess, and then there's also maybe IP Masquerena and SP Little Knight in the extra deck that are still playing under the Impulse lock. Everything I just talked about there with Fire King, we can talk about similarly for deck number 6, which is going to be Rescue Ace. Okay, Rescue Ace is basically all fire main deck monster within engine at least, and then it has all of the same extra deck that the Fire King deck is looking at. So we have Hida, we have Promethean Princess, we have SP Little Knight, IP Masquerena, we even have Relinquished Anima, which can still activate, that's still a dark. We have Zealantis, which is the water, like we're still even playing the water monsters in this deck, and we are just not conflicting at all. The only thing that we're really locked out of is playing cards like Effect Veiler, Ghost Ogre, Nibiru, stuff like that, where if you Impulse first, you're not going to be able to use those light attribute hand traps, and that's not so bad. In the grand scheme of things, it's definitely a worthwhile trade-off, because Impulse is a much better card. Okay, moving on to deck number 7 that can play Dominus Impulse. This is one of the original really good decks that could play Dominus Impulse, and that's going to be Snake Eye. So Snake Eye is going to be revolving around fire monsters, obviously in the main deck with Snake Eye Ash and Poplar and Flamberge and Oak, and then we also have sometimes dark monsters if we're playing like the Azamina version. So we have the Bellstar, the Black Witch, and then we have the Azamina fusions are all dark attribute as well. The extra deck is going to be a lot of the fire cards that we just talked about for Fire King and Rescue Ace. And then it kind of depends on what kind of main deck supplements you're looking at. Like, unfortunately, Impulse does lock you out of playing the Fiendsmith version of this deck, which we're going to also talk about in the next couple decks here. But yeah, if you want to play Impulse in Snake Eye right now, you're going to have to find a different supplementary engine, or, you know, bypass those Fiendsmith cards, because you're not going to be able to play with the light attribute effects. So yeah, this one's debatably even belongs on this list at this point in this iteration of Snake Eye, but because Snake Eye was the original Impulse deck, I think that it was worth mentioning here. Speaking of original Impulse decks, deck number 8 that can support Impulse is going to be the Tempai deck. And just like Snake Eyes, we're talking about the pure version where we cannot play Fiendsmith, we cannot play Bestial Lubellion. We're just kind of looking at Board Breaker Tempai, the same old classic, you know, summon Chandra, slam your head on the table, that's game, that whole deal. You can play Impulse in this deck, and that's a really strong benefit here because they are short on cards, we're short on Chandra, and the field spell are all at 1. So we're going to have to find quality non-engine, quality board breakers to be able to play this deck, and then that's why Impulse is so good here and fits the bill. Okay, moving on to deck number 9 that can play Dominus Impulse, we're going to be looking at Orcus. And I know Orcus is just it's kind of out of the meta right now. It hasn't been really played in a long time. But it is coming up in June where we're going to get Orcus support. So you're going to want to be aware that Orcus can play Impulse. And specifically, you're going to be wanting to pair Orcus with other dark attribute, fire, or water attribute side engines. And specifically, we're looking at the dark ones with Horus. Horus is completely playable under Impulse. You just use Imseti, that's the only effect you're really activating. Even if you're playing Happy, which is the wind attribute one, you can still summon Happy under Impulse, and that's fine. And then otherwise, you're not going to be able to play the Fiendsmith version, because just like we talked about for Snake Eye and for Tempai Dragon, you have to not play those light attribute monsters. You can play the Azamina cards though, which is another benefit here. You can play the Black Witch and you can play the Dark Azamina fusions and be good to go with Orcus. Now, deck number 10 that can support Dominus Impulse. I had to reach a little bit for this one. We're getting a little bit thin on the deck quality here, but Phantom Knight is going to make the number 10 spot. So Phantom Knight is basically entirely dark attribute. Even if you're playing Horus cards like I just talked about for Orcus, you can still summon all of them. We're still just using the dark attribute activated effects, which is Imseti. So that one is all locked in and you're pretty much good to go. The whole extra deck is going to be all dark attribute as well, I'm pretty sure. At least all the important things that you're going to want to be playing with Phantom Knight is going to be able to play under Dominus Impulse. Now, a couple honorable mentions are going to be a couple water decks. We have Marincess. Marincess completely water. It water locks you from the start of the combo, so there is no conflict in there. Your entire extra deck is water. Your entire main deck is water, basically. except for maybe some hand traps, but we can play around that. We can figure out different non-engine to play in Marincess to support the Dominus Impulse. And then we have another like very low tier water deck, which is going to be Goaty. Goaty is also entirely water. It locks you into water very quickly. And yeah, another couple decks that I would have added on this list if you know, it was a couple months ago is going to be the Shark XYZ deck and then the Ice Barrier deck. Like those decks can play Impulse as well, but you know, we're not going to really talk any further about those water decks. RIP Bahamut Shark. Now, a couple of decks that you might think can play Impulse, but actually cannot support it, unfortunately. Let's first talk about Crystron. Crystron's all water in the main deck, but the extra deck does use a lot of attributes that are restricted by Impulse. Notably, we have Cyber Dragon Infinity as one of the main endboard pieces. We have F.A. Dawn Dragster as one of the main endboard pieces and kind of like bridges as well. So locking yourself out of some of your best extra deck interruptions is not the best idea, and that's why the Crystron deck cannot really play Impulse very well. Then we have Plunder Patrol. You might look at this deck, the entire main deck is water monsters, so hey, this one can play Impulse. Unfortunately not. A lot of the extra deck is going to be using other attributes, notably Plunder Patrol Ship List, which is light attribute, which is your best extra deck piece. And then we also have Plunder Patrol Ship Jord, which is going to be another one. That one's not so limiting because it's your starter. You're only really making that turn 1 generally, but still, List is so important for the entirety of the game that Dominus Impulse is not really playable in Plunder. And then one more I want to mention is Yubel. So Yubel in a pure form can play Impulse because it's all dark main deck and extra deck stuff. However, it does really rely on having the Fiendsmith package to actually play a reasonable version or variant of Yubel. So for that reason, Yubel's not really supporting Impulse in its current form. But if there ever was to become a pure Yubel version, we would be seeing Impulse in that particular deck. Okay, so that wraps up this video. Let me know if I missed any decks that you like to play with Dominus Impulse. Because if you can play a deck with Impulse, it's gonna have a nice leg up on your competition in this particular format. With that, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.